Hello, Joy Brooks with Email and Coffee, a recognized expert, an email strategist, a speaker, a trainer, founder and CEO of Optimization Shop, general manager of Only Influencers, program chair of Email Innovations, adjunct lecturer at Georgetown University. Yes, Jean Jennings is a sought after leader in the email marketing space. I was honored when she agreed to share her thoughts and expertise with Email and Coffee. And now, Jean Jennings.
Hey, folks. Joy Brooks with Email and Coffee, and of course, Lucy, right? Okay. Today I'm talking with Jean Jennings, who is, I consider myself to be the grandma of email, but I would say she's my sister in being the grandma of email. We've been around for a really long time, seen a lot of it, and basically fallen in love with it, right? Right. So, Jean, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing, where you've been, where you live, not the address.
So let's see. I'm based in Georgetown. So one of my passions in life is just the Georgetown neighborhood of Washington, D.C. I've been here. I came here to go to school and I just kind of stayed, and that was a long time ago. So that's where I'm based. And it's great because it's right near National Airport. So it's really easy for traveling, either for friends and family or for work. So that's really nice. And I love my neighbors here in Georgetown. We have a great block. We have a couple across the street who forever they go outside about 4 o'clock with chairs, and sometimes there's wine, and neighbors kind of come out and chat. So that makes it really friendly, and that was really great during the pandemic too, to have some outside interaction. But for my work life, I actually wear a bunch of different hats. So the main hat I wear is I have my own consulting firm, Email Optimization Shop, and I help medium to enterprise sized companies make their email marketing more effective. So I do a lot on strategy, a lot on tactics, a lot of A/B split testing, segmentation, targeting, anything that's going to basically, improve that bottom line number. So that's probably the major thing I do for my work life. But then I have like all these other hats that I wear. If you work for yourself, which you do, you probably know you want to have like a couple different revenue streams. Also, I tend to be one of those people that likes a lot of variety in my work. So that's the other thing it gives me. So for a couple years, ever since 2019, I've been general manager of Only Influencers, which is an odd name for an email industry organization, but that's what it is. So we have about 400 members, I think now, all from the email industry. And we do webinars and we do networking and we do live discussions. There's a blog that I manage. We have some of the smartest people in the industry writing for the blog: Chad White, Chris Marriott, Ryan Phelan, Kath Pay, and I manage that. And then, like I said, we do webinars. We're back on track to do pretty much a webinar a month. Fingers crossed, everything works out, which is fun. And then in combination with that, that organization runs a conference every summer called Email Innovations World. We used to be Email Innovations Summit, but we just changed it. And that's really fun. So that is basically one day of workshops, which are 4 hours long, deep dives into email, and then 2 days of a 2-track conference. We tend to cover things that are not so much for beginners, but for successful email marketers who want to take their program to the next level. So for instance, we were talking about BIMI. We've been talking about BIMI for 5 or 6 or more years now, probably even more than that. And so things that you can't even necessarily do yet, but they're on the horizon, we try to talk about them there. This year's conference, obviously, is going to be a lot about AI, which actually we did a lot about AI last year too. So that's kind of fun. So those are 2 other hats. And then the final hat that I wear for my business life is I'm actually a professor in the graduate school at Georgetown University. So my students are earning their master's in integrated marketing communications, and I teach digital marketing, which is a blast. I love it. Obviously, we cover email, but we cover most of the other channels and a lot of the other tactics like performance marketing, programmatic, SEO, social. And I really like that. So I teach that in person some semesters. Other semesters, we have an asynchronous online version that I worked with the university to create, and I teach it that way. So it's really fun, and it's nice to have the interaction with the they're not really young people. They're getting their master's degrees. So they're sort of like late 20s, early 30s, but it's always fun to have interaction with them. And then the most fun is to kind of see where they go. One of my former students posted on LinkedIn just this week that he founded a company and he has a product they're going to launch. And it's like one of those proud moments. Like, I shared it to my network. He had a survey he was asking people to fill out to help him kind of tweak his product offering. So I shared that with a lot of, oh, I'm so proud. So that's really fun. I've been very lucky in my career. I have a lot of different things that I do. They all kind of leverage my knowledge of email marketing in one way or another. But it really makes for a fun work life.
It's well-rounded, but you say luck. I think it's really a lot of hard work.
I feel like the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Mm.
So I think that's one thing. It's funny. A couple semesters ago, one of my students asked me like if I had any tips, because he said, wow, I'd like to have my own consulting firm someday. I'd like to teach like you do. Like, what are your tips? And it's funny because I sort of had to think about it. And the one thing that came to mind was, I'm like, my personality, I have this habit of not taking the easy way. If there's an easy route, but there's a harder route that's more interesting, I will usually take the harder, more interesting route. And I'm not sure that that's always the best thing, but that's definitely kind of what's gotten me to where I am, that's just kind of my nature. I don't want to do things just the easy way to get, an okay return. I want to do things the harder way and then hopefully get a better return. So, one thing my career gives me is the flexibility to travel, to see family and friends, to spend time with my godkids and my nieces and nephews. And so that's been a real blessing with the kind of career I have because, I kind of set my own hours. So.
With all the things that you just set me up with, I can't imagine that you have any spare time, but obviously you do.
I'm pretty busy, and I should correct. It's funny. It's not like I work 4 hours a day. I didn't write that book. But it's more like, it's spring break next week. I'm going to take the afternoon off on Friday and go hang out with my godson. So I'll make up that time either at nights or on the weekend. So it's not that I don't work 40 hours or more. It's just that I can work when it's convenient for me and I can fit things like spending time with Eric into my schedule.
When you, the optimization shop, when you set that up, did you know what you were doing? Did you know what you were getting into? It was like, oh, you know what? I'll just create my own consulting firm. And did people say to you, are you out of your mind?
Well, it's funny because I got laid off right before 9/11, September 2001. I got a couple calls. They told us they were going to lay us off. And my boss, Mark Potts, who's still a great friend of mine, God bless him, he said to the people, it was Reed Elsevier, Reed Business Information US, which was the largest B2B publisher at the time. And they made the decision in September 2001, I guess August 2001, that they needed to focus on their core business, which was print, B2B magazines, and advertising revenue. And I actually had an executive there tell me that the internet was a fad. And so they got rid of the entire digital team from the VP of product development for digital. They got rid of all of us. And
I remember the wrong channel.
I remember at the time saying to the guy, I don't think it's a fad. I've been working in this since 1989 and I've only seen it grow. And I really think, and he was like, no, it's just a fad. And then, a couple years later, they were basically gone. They sold off their 100+ publications kind of piecemeal and kind of left that business. So in a way, at the time, it was funny because it really felt like the end of my world because I was working with people I loved. I was doing work that I loved. And so I got a couple calls when we were told we were getting laid off and we actually were done. I got a couple calls from people who said, hey, I heard through the grapevine, they're laying you guys off. I'm sorry about that, but would you come consult for me? I just, a couple hours a week, I have these things. I know you can do it. And it's funny because, I was so devastated by being let go and I was busy. And so I said, well, I'm going to go to the beach for a week or two and I'll call you back. which as someone who works for themselves, you never do that to someone who wants to hire you as a consultant. But I didn't know that. So I was very kind of laissez-faire about it. Yeah, I'm going to go to the beach. I'm going to chill and I'll call you back. But that's how I really started consulting. So I figured as long as they were calling me, I figured I would start consulting until I got another job. So I basically spent 2002, consulting. And I was at the point where I guess I was consulting 20 hours a week and looking for another job. And I got a job offer. And the salary was the same money I was making working 20 hours a week consulting. And I kind of did this math in my head and I was like, this just doesn't make any sense. And it was less than I had been making at my last job. And it was a bad job market. But I kind of thought, let me just keep consulting because then I can keep looking and hopefully the consulting will last until the job market gets better. And then it was like February 2003. Maybe a little bit before that, but out of the blue, I had been writing for ClickZ, which was an online publication, very well respected at the time. I was so happy to be writing for them. I had a deadline every other week. So every other week I had to turn in a column and I got a call out of the blue and he said, "Hi, this is so-and-so. I'm with Hasbro, the toy company, and we're looking for a digital agency. And I really love what I've been reading from you on ClickZ. And I'd like you to call me back. And I want to know if you're an agency." And so I called him back and I was like, "Define agency." And he's like, "Well, you need copywriters and you need designers and you need coders and you need a strategy person." And he said, "I'm assuming you would be the strategy person because you seem to be writing about that." And I said, "You know what? I can put together an agency." And he said, "Well, great. Why don't you come up to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and why don't you pitch?" And so I gathered some people that I had worked with who did those things. And we went up and we pitched. And I will never forget when we were sitting waiting to go into the pitch, we see these people come out of the elevator. I think it was an elevator. It might have just been a lobby, but I recognized one of the guys and I knew who he was. And he was someone in the industry that I really respected. He was with kind of a big agency. And I remember thinking, oh, we're toast, man. How can we go up against this guy? And I had been up all night because I'd been tweaking my presentation. I couldn't sleep, so I just got up and was working like all night. And we went in and pitched, and we ended up getting a call and getting the business. So that was a 2-year deal. And I remember signing it. My hand was kind of shaking because I realized that this meant that for the next 2 years, I really couldn't take a full-time job. And looking back on it, it was a wonderful opportunity. I'm so thankful for it. It really started my consulting career. I didn't charge them nearly enough, although if I charged them more, we might have not have gotten the business. And it was a tremendous learning experience. And so I'm really forever thankful for that. That was one of those times where, like, you're right. On the one hand, there was some luck there, but on the other hand, it was the fact that I'd been writing every 2 weeks about the work I was doing and how I saw email. And so that was really great. So did I know what I was getting into? No. And even then I figured, well, after 2 years, then I'll go get another job working for somebody else. And then it just kind of kept going. So I feel very lucky about that. You know, when you work for yourself, it always ebbs and flows. There's times when you have way too much work. And now I know those are the times you work 60 or 80 hours a week. And I do that. And then there's times when you don't have enough work. And the good news is at the beginning of that, now I'm smart enough to know, okay, this gives me more time to do other things. But yeah, you have to make sure that you're going to get that flow again, because you can't have it ebbing forever.
Right. I remember those ClickZ articles because I believe they were highly, you wrote some highly technical pieces on metrics and, formulations and, and I remember them because having to write reports. And in the very beginning, the reporting on some of the ESPs may not have been the best. So, you were able to get opens and clicks and, unsubscribes and things of that nature. But if you wanted to come up with any type of a report where you could essentially explain how the marketing was proceeding, your metrics, your formulas would come in hand. And I remember that's how I That's how I was introduced to you thousands of years ago. And I remember coming back to you and saying, Jean, do you have any of those articles? Because and I think you shared one with me.
Yeah, it's funny. They're all still on ClickZ. A lot of them are kind of buried, but if you go, you can find them. They still have a page that has all my stuff, and I wrote for them for over 10 years, so you can do the math on that. 2 articles a month for over 10 years.
That's
and
work.
Some of
That's hard work, Jean. That's hard work.
I liked it because I like to write. And I was just writing about the work I was doing for clients. And obviously, when you write that, you can't say the client's name in the article. But I found interesting ways to, not say their name, but still get kind of the learning across. Because that was really, I had started reading ClickZ when I was at Reed, and I found the articles really useful. There were columnists back then that I followed and I read. And so when I was asked to write for them, I was really honored. And I felt like, back then, and I don't mean to get too much in the weeds on the old stuff, but, I started my career in CompuServe in 1989. And the internet, nobody knew what that was back in 1989. And it was late 89. It was September. So it was almost 1990. But I remember, we had these clients, Marriott, the American College of Physicians, big associations, big companies, NovaCare. And our job there was to talk to the people at the businesses, the clients, and understand the communication they were doing offline, which almost everything was. There was some faxing going on back then, and then figure out, working with our technical team at CompuServe, how to take the communication online. And that sounds so simple now, right? Like, instead of they'd be like, well, all of the hotels around the world fax us these reports every night on occupancy and rates. And I was like, well, how about if they could all upload it? Because back then, and again, showing my age, but fax machines relied on, it wasn't an internet connection, it was just a phone connection. And it wasn't unusual if you had a long fax, maybe 50 pages, after 20, the connection might kick and you'd have to start from scratch. And it would take a long time to fax all these pages. So it was a really good learning experience. And then we did some fancier stuff, like for NovaCare, we put together a program where their physicians, assistants, nurses who were going to see people in person had a program on their laptop that they could put information in instead of having to do it at night when they went home on their desktop. But we used to call it the bleeding edge. And everything we did, we would try to transfer to other clients. We would share learnings. And so that's very much what ClickZ was, I felt like, back then. And back then, I'm talking about kind of the 1999, 2000. People were doing things with email, and then they were sharing it. And then people would take what they learned and then iterate on it and then share it. And it was really kind of a wonderful way to expand. I think everyone felt like we were growing the pie, like we weren't competing with each other because there was plenty of work. We were just trying to help everybody do a better job of it. And so that was really powerful to me. And that's really that's really kind of, we were doing that back at CompuServe, but then when we got in the internet and in the email industry, I feel like people were doing that as well. And I wanted to be a part of that and help and contribute to that. And the data stuff you mentioned is really interesting. I did a presentation, it was a couple years ago now, and I was talking about OpenRate and ClickReach. I'm sorry, OpenReach and ClickReach. And for those of you who don't know, if you are doing a series of emails, let's say you have a 4-effort series to, I don't know, drive someone to a webinar, to register for a webinar. You can certainly look at your metrics on each individual email. It's not a bad thing. But you can get a lot of learnings if you look at them together as an aggregate. And so OpenReach would be not, like, let's say that each of those emails had a 30% open rate. Well, that's great. But if you look at OpenReach, that'll tell you over the course of those 4 emails, what percentage of your list opened at least one. Because is it the same 30% every time? Or did you, over the course of those 4 emails, hit, 80%? And that's an important thing to know. It goes to the health of the list. And I remember I worked with General Services Administration, which is part of the US government, and we were doing email series. And so I remember kind of trying to figure out how to report on these because, each one was okay, but I needed to have an aggregate way. And we had a key call to action. And I wanted to say how many people, anyway, so I came up with this way to look at it. And I didn't call it reach back then because I didn't know that term. I think I called it open rate, unique open rate over all 4 emails, unique click-through rate on the key performance indicator over all 4 emails, over the key CTA. And so they were these long-winded things, but it was the same metric. It was the same calculation. So I was talking about open and reach rates in a seminar a few years ago, and I had done this work for GSA like way back when I started. And somebody puts in the chat, I created that metric. I wrote about that metric in this year. And I kind of let it go, but I kind of saw it. I kind of was like, that's a little icky, because like everybody uses that now. And maybe I wasn't, I know I didn't coin the phrase. I know I saw somebody else later who was doing what I was doing. And then I did use their name because their name was better than my name. But that stuff kind of cracks me up. And I actually looked it up, and I looked up the paper that they had written where they talked about it, which was the same year that they had put in the chat that's when they created it. And it was a couple years after I had used that metric without the name, with a different name for GSA. So there's also a part of me that's like, I don't know. I mean, there's all of these things out there, and maybe there's new things under the sun, but mostly what we're doing is just taking direct mail metrics and kind of morphing them.
Mhm.
And when I studied, when I was in college and grad school, there wasn't digital marketing. There was just offline marketing. So I'm very well versed in the foundations of that. But I thought that was very interesting that someone felt the need to kind of take credit for what I was doing, like they invented it and I stole it. And I hope I never come across like that, because that's not the point of it to me. And I think it's very, anyway, you get the idea.
The world is full of lots of different people. And sometimes your hard work, you may be humble, over your hard work and think, oh, I'm glad I did this. I learned a lot. It's helping me move forward. And then somebody comes and like knocks down the Jenga, all the blocks, and you're like, oh, I'm an imposter. I didn't do anything. And you're like, no, don't let anybody do that. Don't let people do that.
I just feel like, in the early days, everyone was just taking what other people did and iterating on it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's how we should all be approaching this still, because there really isn't that much new under
No, it's marketing. There's nothing, we just use new words. We take old words and we turn them into new words but it's marketing.
And expand it. I mean, it's just the idea of metrics and what you can track. So.
Exactly. And anyway. As we've all said a million times, it's the list. It's it's your customer base. That's who you're dealing with. And everybody's a little different because they're talking to them a little differently. And they've got maybe a slightly different product or a slightly different solution. So, every time it's an iteration, but there's nothing new. It's like, oh, I'm going to send an email. What are you going to do? It'll be top of mind. Oh, I've never heard of that before. I mean, but top of mind, what? How are you going to do that? Are you going to do that with webinars? Are you going to do that with a newsletter? How are you going to do that? What voice? Maybe you've got a really good webinar series. Okay, no one's going to be able to beat that.
Well, and again, I feel like there's enough business to go around. People are always looking for knowledge.
Right.
And so, I just feel like that's just kind of silly.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
But, it's good. And it's yeah.
So obviously, it's not luck, it's hard work. So now that you've got this, you literally fell into a business, right?
Yes.
So you're running the business.
Yeah.
In everything that I've heard from you goes back to networking. It's like, well, I knew this person and I knew that person. I had to put this agency together on a dime. And then I knew that person coming out of the lobby. It's like, it's not what you know. I mean, what you know makes a difference. It's not what you know, but who you know. So it's like a very interesting combination.
You've got to have both, because if you don't have knowledge but you know people, it's only going to get you so far. I had so Bart Thornburg, longtime email person, knew him when I was active in the Email Experience Council. He's here in the DC area, and he was nice enough to come in and speak to my class last night at Georgetown University. So he's now doing CRM and performance marketing. And we had studied performance marketing for yesterday's class. So it was neat. And then afterward, he and I had a little catch up. But yeah, and it was funny because he's changed jobs. He used to be with Total Wine and now he's with My Eye Doctor. And I was like, that's really cool. Like, how'd all that happen? And he goes, oh, well, it's networking. And it's funny. And his stories were very similar to mine. I worked here with these people early on, and then I took this job. Then I brought that person from the old job back. And then somebody I worked with here went there, and then they hired me. And then I brought somebody in, and so that's it. And I think that's one thing that's happening. Even networking is even more important than it used to be with the new use of AI to look through resumes to figure out who to interview. Because don't get me wrong. I mean, the thing is that, so it's a combination of things, right? It's so much easier to apply for a job now. On LinkedIn, you can literally find a job posting and there's, what do they call it? One-click apply. And they'll just shoot your LinkedIn profile off to the company. So it doesn't take a lot. So what I'm hearing from hiring people is that they are getting flooded with resumes for absolutely every position. And so they're using AI to filter it out. So your odds of getting the interview from just sending in a resume are getting smaller and smaller. If you know someone, it doesn't guarantee you're going to get the job. But in my experience, if you know someone and you're qualified, you talk to that person, your resume is going to get to the top of the pile and you're going to get through to the first interview. Now, once you get the first interview, it's all on you. You got to do the rest. But it can get you past that initial stage where it's getting harder and harder to rise to the top. So, with my class, I try to bring in a guest speaker every single class. We have guest speakers from Yahoo, from Silverline Communications, which is a PR firm here in DC owned by a friend of mine, Social Media Examiner. Someone I went to college with works there. She comes and speaks to us.
Is it Jay Baer? That was it. Who owned that company a long time ago? Social Media Examiner.
Oh, I'm embarrassed. I don't know the guy who owns it.
Right?
I don't think it's Jay, although I could be wrong. Emily Crum is who I went to college with, and she's director of strategy there. Mm-hmm. But what I tell them is they're going to come in, they're going to talk to us about, working in this channel or in this tactic. You need to connect with them on LinkedIn right after they speak to us. You need to let them know you were in my class. You need to reach out and ask them to connect, because they said you never know when something like that could come in handy. And, again, I've been teaching for 8 or 9 years now. It's been a while. So it's amazing. Students will come in the class and go, I reached out to them and they connected with me. And then I asked them a question and they answered. And I'm like, of course they did. So you never know when those contacts could come in handy, and you should build them at every opportunity. Because again, you never know. I mean, a lot of my first consulting gigs were people that I knew or friends of friends. I had a friend and his brother called me because his brother had told him that I'd gotten laid off. And so you need to build those connections, and you should build those connections in all directions. Don't get me wrong. It's nice to build connections with someone who can hire you as a consultant or someone can hire you for a job, but it's just important to build those connections for people you might want to hire in the future or you might want to bring in as a subcontractor. And you never know what's going to come out of it, but there's no reason not to connect. LinkedIn makes it so simple, but you've got to have that note. You have to have that note if you reach out to connect with them. Don't just send a blind connection. Let them know, I attended your webinar today. I saw you speaking on Joy's podcast. This is the connection. Will you connect with me now? And most people are more than happy to do that.
Yeah. And those people that are not, those are not your people.
Yeah.
That's it. They're not the culture you want to be with. So it's not necessarily you.
Right. But also I get a lot of cold outreach, and I look and we have no connections in common, and I don't know how they found me, and I don't really know what they're going for, and there's no note, and those I usually don't accept.
Yeah, because you've got to explain. I mean,
you've got to explain to me, and you don't even have to have a reason. Just like I said, just make some sort of, I saw you on Joy's podcast, I saw you at a webinar,
I'm
You
interested in
know,
email marketing.
I saw
Somebody
this
took your
post
class,
you
just something that
something.
connects the dots.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
I get a lot of cold outreach, and most of
Yeah.
them are trying to work for me because
Yeah.
it appears that I work for agencies, so they think that I can hire them. And it's, I'm very nice, I'm very polite, but I am at the end of my career and more focused on the podcast than I am on email marketing. So it's, I'm sort of a dead end, not telling people that they shouldn't connect with me. That's not it, because I'm interested in people. I like
Right.
talking with people. Everybody's got a story. And I
Yeah.
feel that that story is worth sharing at some level. So, I enjoy connecting with people. I'm probably possibly the only one that when people connect with me cold, that I reply to them. And I'm nice. I nicely say, no, thank you very much. I'm not looking for your services, but I hope that you're, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I actually answer because that's where I'm at in my life.
Right. And the other thing is, I think that Maritza Lazima is someone who I know. I used to work with her in the 90s, and she also speaks to my class. She opens my class. She's got a great agency here. It's She's multilingual, so she does a lot of work for clients that are looking for multilingual marketing. And one of her big things is, you got to give. You can't just expect to get. So I think that's another important thing to keep in mind. If you're going to go to someone to just, ask them for something, try to think what you can give them before you do that. And, one thing I tell my students is, I said, it doesn't cost you anything to like a post, to make a comment on it, if you think it's smart to reshare it to your network. So when you connect with the speakers, look at what they're posting. And if you see an article you like, write in the comments, wow, that was really great article. I learned XXX. Be specific to show that you read it, because there's value in that. It doesn't cost you anything but a little bit of time to do that,
Mm-hmm.
but there's value to that, and people remember things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you ping them, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's Jean's student who's been like commenting on my posts. Like, yeah, I'm happy to engage with them.
Right.
So think about what you can bring to the table as well as what you want to walk away
Yeah,
with.
that is very important, and that's somewhat of what is lacking in social these days, because people will post stuff, but they're not inviting the conversation. Somehow it's a flat post where this is what I'm doing, and the response will either be that's great or no response at all, And in many cases, that's okay, but when you do post something, you've got to think this is social. This is not only about me. This is about the community. So how can
Yeah.
we talk about this?
And it's getting more crowded. I used to post when I would write articles, and I write my articles to try to help people, give them ideas of things to test, teach them about proper testing procedures, share what I'm doing in the hopes it'll help them move the needle on their program. And I have a person who helps with my social media, and she's wonderful. But I've noticed in the last year, things are you don't get the likes or the shares. And so I think we need to be better at how we're posting, because I think the game has changed a little bit. I don't think it's enough anymore just to have great content. You want to see what you can do to really kind of drive that two-way communication. So that's one thing that we're actually working on with our social media program. And we're definitely not there yet, but we're trying to get there.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of process being taught to people who are looking for to prospect in LinkedIn. So it's turned into a solopreneur love fest where everybody's like, I'm in Mexico and I have this great life, and my clients are great, and become a client. And it's just like, okay, God bless you. You're in Mexico. You've got a great life. But how do I relate to that? Like, only if I want to live abroad and do exactly what you're doing am I going to relate to you. Otherwise, you're not you're selling a lifestyle, and that's what's being that's the formula that that they're feeding people for an algorithm. Oh, it's your lifestyle, it's your authenticity, it's your how vulnerable you are. And I'm like, no, go back to authenticity, but really think about who are you, what's your service, who's your marketplace, and start talking to them. Let's get rid of all this other nonsense, because everybody's doing the same thing. It's, talk about this, and you've got this hook at the end so people click through. I'm like, stop. Please stop.
I feel like, and I don't know why, I feel like it sort of coincides with the demise of Twitter, now X, that LinkedIn's gotten a lot more kind of personal stuff. And that's interesting to me. But it's funny. I have Dennis Damon, which is a name a lot of old-time email folks will know. I'm pretty sure it was he and I who were talking years ago. I'm pretty sure it was him. And he said something like, some people are here to share knowledge, and they do want to build their business, because I did want to build my business. But I also liked sharing knowledge, and I liked talking about what other people were doing. And I felt like I needed to talk about what I was doing to get them to talk about what they were doing, and then we could all collaborate and learn and grow. And he said, but there's some people here who just like the attention. And it's funny, he and I both kind of agreed that, I go speak at shows to meet other people. I like networking, but also to build my business. And I think that was his approach too back then. And if I could have grown my business and done some of that without having to be on stage all the time, I think I would have done it. I don't mind speaking. I enjoy it, but it's not like, I don't need that for my ego. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And that's the thing, Gina, that's difficult, because a lot of people who do go on the road, it is ego, and they get lost in that. And you've always had a message, and it wasn't you on stage. It was the message on stage. You were delivering it.
Yeah. And I try to get up there and serve. I try to provide value without a purchase, stuff that's going to help people do their email marketing better. And I know that whenever I go up and talk about it, there's going to be a big swath of the audience that's going to go do it on their own, and that's fine. But there's going to be a certain percentage that decides they don't have the bandwidth, or they don't have the internal expertise, and those are the ones that end up being my clients.
Right.
And that's great. So yeah, it's not, once in a blue moon, I have someone say, oh, you're just up there bragging. And I'm like, well, then I need to recheck myself, because I really am not up there with the intention of bragging. I'm up there with the intention of getting people excited about email and see what you can do. I feel so bad for email marketers who are just sort of like, I get up, I create an email, I send it. I create another email, I send it. I create another email, I send it. That sounds so boring. And I think if you can teach people, that's one of the things that's great about automation. That's one thing that's going to be great about AI, because it's going to take away a lot of the mundane tasks that are happening. And that is going to free us as email marketers up to do some of the really cool stuff like A/B split testing and strategy and what can we do in new projects. And so that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help email marketers see how fun it can be and get them to start leveraging that. Because I think people who tell me they were burned out on email and it was just all get the email out the door, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that would be not a lot of fun, maybe.
Yeah, that's kind of sad when the marketing department ends up just that routine. And I've been there. It's happened to me. It's not good.
Yeah, and I understand, but you've got to break out of that.
Right.
I had one large association I was working with, and I remember I was like at a conference at the time, and I was getting these calls, and oh my gosh, I need a subject line. It's got to send in 5 minutes. And I'm like, okay, send me the email and I'll take a look at it. And then I was like, what's the point of sending this email? What do you mean? What's our goal? What do you mean? And I remember going to the CMO, and I was like, I think we need to just like put a hold on things, because we are just like running ragged to get stuff out the door.
Right.
And we don't know why.
It's throwing it against the wall.
And we don't have the time to look at the reports on it, and we're not really thinking about what we're trying to the goal is not to get the email sent. The goal is to send an email and make some action happen. And some of it was other departments, oh, let's send an email. It needs to go out in an hour. And I remember putting things on, we took a hold for a week, partly because I was out of town and I couldn't deal with it, but mostly because I was like, this is just silly. We're running our team ragged and there's just no reason. So I think we knocked it back. We put on hold on like external requests for emails, and I told them, just send them to me. I'll take the heat. And then we were able to like take a breath and start back and say, okay, let's focus on what actually matters. Let's make sure we're doing it right. Let's make sure the content's right. Let's make sure it's working by looking at the results.
Let's make sure it's measurable, because what are we doing?
That's one of my biggest pet peeves. And that's one of the things I work on with all of my clients. If we don't have it in place, I had a call earlier this week with a client that's on HubSpot, and they're using Microsoft Dynamics. And yeah, like they were trying to run off click rates for KPIs. And years ago, I had gone back, I wrote an article, first for the OI Metrics project blog, and then I posted it on my own blog. But basically, I looked back at a whole bunch of tests I've done over the years, and only about 7% of the time did the highest click-through rate also have the highest revenue per email. So what I found is a lot of times the click-through rate wasn't statistically significant, the variance, but the revenue was. And so I actually published that because, if you're running on click-through rates, you could be making a wrong decision. What's 100 minus 7? 93% of the time. Because, we should be testing things that then we're going to leverage in the future. So that's a big part. I often find myself with clients, if we don't have either conversion being something past the click, or revenue, if it's a revenue generating action, we need to have some sort of business metric in place. And typically that involves integrating with another system.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not hard to do. It was a lot harder to do, 20 years ago. It's not hard to do now. And if you're not, and it really is very important. You have to be able to get to a business metric. And if you're generating leads, that's fine, but it's a completed lead form. That is your goal. That is your business metric, not just a click.
Right.
Because too many times we see people click through and then they don't complete the form, and that's not really productive.
Right. You were talking about conferences and going to lots of conferences, and that's exhausting, but it's exciting, but it's exhausting.
Yes.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
So how many different places have you been? How many conference halls have you been in? Right?
That would be interesting. It's funny because on my website I have like past speaking engagements, but I don't think it goes back all the way. I think it only goes back to. So
you've probably been to Vegas, Chicago, Houston. The hubs that were.
Yeah. Well, there's the US shows, right? So Vegas for years was a big thing. I was in Vegas once or twice a year for shows. There was once I was in Vegas, I was speaking at 2 different shows and they were a week apart. And in between them fell not just Easter, but my birthday. And back then I really didn't like going to Vegas. Now I actually do like Vegas. But back then, and I remember moaning to my friend. So I have a really good friend, Lauren Walsh, and her birthday is 3 days after mine. So for years, we've been celebrating our birthdays together. We would do a joint event. And I remember saying to her, I'm so bummed. I won't be here. We can't do the joint event, or we'll have to delay it. And I'm going to be alone in Las Vegas. And such a good friend. I get a text the next day and she goes, so Greg and I want to join you in Vegas.
Great.
So she and her husband met me in Vegas. We celebrated my birthday. We celebrated her birthday. We laid by the pool a lot. But that was just funny. There were just 2 different conferences and it just didn't make sense to fly home. So in the States, you've got Vegas. For years, EEC was in New Orleans, which was always a great show. I love Chicago. I have a cousin, Erin, in Chicago, and I always visit her when I'm in Chicago. San Francisco used to be a big place for shows. I did a lot of shows in San Francisco, Austin. I've spoken here in DC, which is lovely because you get to sleep in your own bed. Like best of all worlds. Philadelphia. I think the ones that stick in my mind are the ones that are overseas, because that's been, for me, so much fun. I just got back. I spoke at Email Marketing Summit in Denmark, run by MediWill and sponsored by Sleek Note, which was a lovely one-day conference, about 500 attendees. There were only 4 of us who were presenting in English. Everyone else presented in Danish. But I'm really lucky because around the world, most people speak English. But that was just a great show. So nice to meet people. In the past, I've spoken in Amsterdam. I've spoken in Norway. I've spoken in Sweden. Where else? I've spoken in London, Germany. When I back around like 2010 timeframe, I actually had a gig with Marketing Sherpa, which is another great publishing brand. They were owned by Mech Labs at that point, and basically they offered full day email marketing workshops. We had a basic and we had an advanced, and I created the content, and it was literally 8 hours with like a lunch break and 2 other breaks. So it was a lot of content. And every month for about a year and a half, I would do 2 or 3 workshops somewhere in the US or Canada or Germany. So that was really fun to kind of get the chance to travel like that and kind of fly in. And, you said conferences take it out of you, and they do. You know what really takes it out of you? Talking and teaching for 8 hours. And I remember more than once at the end of that, someone would be like, when do you fly out? And I'd be like, 10 o'clock, I'm going to go grab some dinner. And they'd be like, can I buy you dinner and pick your brain? And honestly, I'd be like, there's nothing left in my brain. I don't want to talk anymore.
Pouring out of my ear.
I love email, but I just want to go and like read the news and like eat. But yeah, so that was a lot of fun. One thing I think I never occurred to me when I got into this was the traveling to speak at conferences. And it really is kind of a thrill. And, if you speak overseas, definitely they're covering your expenses. Usually there's a speaking fee. And then I always, if it's someplace I haven't been, or even if it's someplace I have been, quite honestly, I'll usually tack on a few days. So I spoke in Denmark. It was in a town. It was actually the town where Hans Christian Andersen was born. So they actually arranged a private walking tour for us the day after the conference, and we did that. And then I stayed another day and went to the museum, and I had some great meals there and just kind of kicked around. And then I went back to Copenhagen, which is where I'd flown into, and I spent another couple days in Copenhagen. So that's the other fun thing about speaking at conferences, is getting the opportunity to travel. And then, usually I end up blowing my speaking fee on the travel I do after the conference. But it's still just been a really lovely way to kind of get some places that I wouldn't otherwise go.
Yeah, you're quite a self-made woman. I mean, there's a lot about you that is about you, but in such a graceful way. It's just like you're making your mark. It's just everything just falls into place. I guess it's that luck thing that you're talking about.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sure sometimes it's a mess.
Sometimes it doesn't all fall into place, but you focus on the positives. I mean, it all worked out fine. When I came back from Denmark, I landed and they didn't have my luggage, but I was like, okay. But then I get home, it's about 10:30 at night. I can't for the life of me find my house key. I have no idea. I saw it in the morning when I packed in Copenhagen, and I can't find it, and I'm outside my door. And so I have a really good friend who lives a couple blocks away, and it's 10:30 at night on a Wednesday. And I called her and I said, I'm so sorry, I can't find my key. And she goes, that's okay, I've got your spare. Let me put some clothes on. And I'm like, you're in bed already? And she goes, it's not a problem. Let me put some clothes on. I'll walk over. We'll get you in your house. And God bless her, she did. And then 2 days later, I found my keys. I have no idea how I didn't find them that night, but so, not everything falls into place,
Yeah.
but I feel very blessed and lucky because all the important stuff falls into place.
Did you do
Or
that?
if it doesn't,
What's the matter? Puppies, you okay? Oh.
I mean, I guess that's one thing I would say to anybody watching, because I think there are times in our lives, it's good to have a plan. And then there's times in our lives, like getting laid off, that the plan you had kind of falls apart. I've also been through a divorce. So there's times in your life when you had this plan, you thought you were covered, and then it falls apart. And I think the key is that those are the times you have to look at it as an opportunity, and you have to pivot. And maybe you have to pivot twice or 3 times until you figure it out. but you can't just, stay put and wallow in the fact that your plan got blown up. When I got laid off before I started my business, I think it was me. I think I found this book called Who Moved My Cheese, and it was helpful to me. And so I brought it in the office, and I had people pass it around. It's a quick read. I'm like, you've got to read this. It'll make you feel better about all this. I'll never forget, one of the guys we worked with came in my office, threw the book on my desk and said, I don't know why you gave me this. This is CR asterisk P. I just want my cheese back. And I was like, dude, you missed the whole point of the book. Cheese ain't coming back. They moved it. You got to go find new cheese. And I think that's one thing I would say to people. If you're, in a place and things get blown up and your plan is that you just got to find a new plan. I wish I could tell you otherwise. That is just usually what you got to do.
The thing is, hello. Dogs.
And the easiest way to do that is to get past wallowing in what happened.
The funny thing is it works a little bit like an A/B test. Or when you're doing email marketing and you're working on this strategy and it's just not working, you don't scrap the whole plan and say, okay, we're not doing email anymore. We're gonna do social now. You've got to figure it out and move forward. The point is, there are clues, there are breadcrumbs. You track them back. You find the pivot point. You move forward. You got to do that.
And when I look back on those things that blew up my life, like my divorce and getting laid off, they ended up being blessings in disguise. Yeah. At the time, it seemed like the end of the world. I didn't know what I was going to do. And now I'm like, you know what? There was a reason that happened, and I'm better off for it now, which I didn't realize at the time. Because it's given me, again, like the flexibility. I don't think I ever would have made the decision to go out on my own. Someone asked me how I made the jump off the cliff, and I'm like, oh, I was pushed.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. No, the same thing happened to me because I was laid off as well. And that's when I decided, I'm not going to let somebody else make the decisions for me anymore. If I don't want to work, it's going to be because I don't want to work, not because I got laid off. I'm tired of, wondering, am I going to get laid off again? Am I going to put all this effort into something and have somebody turn around and say, didn't work out. We're merging, blah, blah, blah. You're laid off.
I said to my friends, they decided the internet was a fad. Can I really make worse decisions for myself on my own?
Really?
I mean, I know it's not a fad.
Or Elsevier. My goodness.
It's still around. That was a long time ago.
I remember, I was in publishing too. And I remember when Elsevier was a big deal.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I also worked for a company. And they were very strong in database marketing, but it was all print. But they had, for all of their consumers, they could almost tell you everything about them. Because for those consumers that got a product, they asked the consumer to fill out a survey, and they gifted them in some way, shape, and form.
Yeah.
So they did direct marketing, but it was database marketing. However,
well, it was the old warranty cards, right? You got a toaster oven, fill out this card to get your warranty, and we're going to need your name and your address and how many people are in your home and what kind of car you drive and
everything.
It's really funny. So I used to, with Joel Book, another kind of name from the past, you said it was okay if I reminisced. Joel Book was with Exact Target, excellent person. And he and I used to teach a session. I think it was like a workshop. I think it was a couple hours at the database. I think it was the database marketing conference every year in Vegas. We did it for a couple years in a row. And I'll never forget one year I was up there talking about opt-in and preference centers and things. And someone raised their hand and said to me, this is a waste of time. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, I know more about these people than they know about themselves. I don't need to ask them anything because I have all the data. I know exactly who they are. And I remember thinking, wow, that's really arrogant. And I think that's another thing we need to watch for as marketers because, I've seen some of those databases. I know, there was one, I'm trying to remember who it was. Was it Experian or somebody who had this thing up for a while where you could look at all the data they had on you. And it was funny because you had to put in like a little bit of information. They would show you everything they had on you. and then they would ask you to fill in the information they didn't have, and they would ask you to fix anything that was wrong. And I've never had children of my own, but I have nieces and nephews and godchildren, and some of them are even related to me. A lot of them aren't, technically, but it had me down as having like a couple of kids. It was years past my divorce. They still had me as married. They had a lot of stuff in there that was just sort of off. And I didn't fix it. I just left it. And I didn't fill in anything that was blank because I figured it was none of their business. But I think we have to be careful with that as marketers. You probably saw the kind of things I was buying for children, and so made the assumption that I had children. But I don't. So I think we have to be careful as marketers. I think that, it's hard, right? There's observed behavior, which is what that is, which can be accurate, but you need to always keep in the back of your mind there might be another reason for what's going on. And then there's reported data, which can be better, but also can be not so great. Because, all of us, right? If you ask me to report, I'll tell you I eat pretty healthy, but what you don't know is, I had a whole box of milk duds earlier today because I was working and I shouldn't have eaten them. So that's the other thing that goes on. You have to be careful, and you can never assume. The idea that you would know more about someone than they do, that's not a good marketing thing.
Yeah. It's the personas that you attempt to build for your businesses, and the things that may be happening that you're unaware of, where you're thinking that, oh, my audience are, it's 35-year-old women, whatever. In the meantime, the 35-year-old women are buying it for their husbands, but you don't know that.
Right. And you can still market without absolute knowledge, but you always have to be open, and you have to be open to learning new things, because that's the other thing. Things change. Yeah. So that's the other thing I think is important.
Well, that's why for me, that's why it's exciting.
Yeah.
Because, you are, if you're open, and if it's not your ego, and if you're not, no, I know, arrogant person, if you're not that person, you're surprised when you see what's happening. It's sort of like a Sherlock Holmes mystery that unfolds in front of you, and you're like, oh, the butler didn't do it. It was, and it just, you're like fascinated by all the pieces that finally fall together. And that's how, that's why I fell in love with email marketing. There is the routine of sending the email, but if you're game enough, every once in a while, you're like, let's try this. Why? Because I see some trend here, and let's see if this trend is really true. The only way to do it is to experiment with it.
Exactly. You've got to let your audience tell you what works for them. Right. It's not about what I think or what you think. It's about what the audience thinks. And the best way to find that out is to A/B split test it. And, I was working for a big company, one of the GMs of one of the divisions, I was like, this is the A/B split test, and this the test version 1. And it generated, 40% more revenue. And that's why it's the winner. And I'll never forget. She was like, you know what? I just don't like it. We're going to stick with the control. So I was like, okay, fine. Not going to argue with you. But then, of course, when I went back to the CMO and I said, hey, just a heads up, here's the test results, and she wants to go with the control, and the CMO's like, well, we're not doing that. I said, well, would you talk to her? And she's like, I'll talk to her, but you just change that. The next sentence is going to be, the test is the new control, and that's what we're using because it brought in 40% more revenue. And I said, I was hoping you'd say that. So that's what's important. And I think we've all, as marketers, we've had pieces, emails, direct mail packages, ads that we hated. But if the audience likes them and it generates the action you need, you go with it. It's not about our personal opinion about things.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So with all the places that you've been, what's your favorite food? Like, of all the places that you've been, like the Philadelphia cheesesteak. Like, what's your favorite, like, when you're going there, you can't wait to have the
I think it's changed over the years. I'm a big fan of seafood, and especially shellfish. And so, for instance, when I was in Denmark, earlier this month, I ate a lot of seafood and shellfish. I think I had seafood and shellfish at almost every meal because they have great seafood and shellfish. We had smorgasbord, which is like an open faced sandwich, and I had that with shrimp on it, which was delicious. So I think when I'm traveling, I try to eat, whatever they have there that's good. When I was in Norway before the pandemic, every place had fish soup and it was delicious. So I ate fish soup a lot. I remember years and years ago when my niece and nephews were little, where was I? I was somewhere. It might have been Sweden because I've been to Sweden a couple times. And reindeer was on the menu at all of the restaurants. So the first time I saw it, I took a picture and sent it. And I was like, I don't know. It's only a month before Christmas. Should I order reindeer? And they were like, no, no, no. And then when I went back to Sweden later, I actually ordered reindeer and it was fine. But I try to eat local. I mean, I like food. I was a very picky eater as a child. I really didn't do much. And now that I'm older, I'm much more adventurous. And, I think living in DC really helps because we have a great variety of restaurants here. I mean, around the corner from my house, there's an Afghani restaurant that just opened that I can't wait to try. Villa Yara, which is Mediterranean. Das Ethiopian, which is one of my very favorites. I love Ethiopian food. Indian food, obviously Italian, Vietnamese, Korean, Thai, Chinese. So just, really a big fan of food. So whenever I go someplace, I try to eat what's local. Years ago, I went to China, which was amazing. Now, that wasn't for my work trip. My husband at the time had business in China. So I got to go with him. I got to go to Beijing and Shanghai. And it was really funny because before we left, I was talking with one of the other partners at the law firm because he was a partner in a law firm. And the partner said to me, Jean, you're going to have trouble because you're there for 2 weeks. And you can't find good pizza in China. And I said, why would I be eating pizza
in China?
And he said, well, you're not going to have Chinese food for every meal. And I said,
yeah.
Why not? It's probably the best Chinese food I'll ever eat. Why wouldn't
have a different dumpling every night?
And we pretty much did. And, the thing about that is it was really fascinating to be in China. It was a fabulous trip. I'm so glad I got the opportunity to go. The law firms were so lovely. They all wanted to, have someone hang out with me all day while my husband was working because they didn't want me to be alone. But I wanted to be alone. I mean, I took the subway in Shanghai. I walked all over Beijing. I like exploring. I like exploring on my own. But we had some amazing meals. You would just go in. There would be a huge round table. They'd have a lazy Susan in the middle. And they would just keep bringing food. And at first you'd be like, what's this? What's that? And then it got to the point where you're like, I don't care. I'm going to take a little bit of everything and then I'm going to go back and have more of what I really like and stop worrying about what's what. And I'm back to eating Chinese food in the States, but I got to tell you, it took me a while because the Chinese food over there is nothing like the Chinese food we get here. It's completely different category.
Completely. Yeah. Well, it's just like, it's like going to Italy and having pizza or a pasta dish. It's completely different.
It's completely different. It's funny. I have a good girlfriend, Chrissy Neri, from college, and she married an Italian and lives in Bologna. And they came to visit last summer. Last summer. And I remember because I was going through, because I love to cook and I love to cook for people. I've decided is my love language. And I'm like, we could do pizza one night. And I'm like, oh, probably not. And I'm like, homemade pasta. And I'm like, oh yeah, no. So we were constantly trying. And I remember her big request was she loves Chinese food. She's like, could we just get Chinese food one night? Because I love Chinese food. So, but yeah, it's kind of funny. I'm like, I better not make Italian for the Italians because that's probably not going to be, my best foot forward. My best Italian is probably not nearly as good as what they eat every day.
I love food. And I love seeing your pictures on social every once in a while of your food, whether it's at home or if it's, out. I'm always like, oh, that's nice.
It's funny.
Idea.
One of my neighbors, Craig, is hysterical because if I don't post food for a few days and I run into him, he'll be like, "Are you eating? Because we're not seeing any food on the social. Are you okay? Are you eating?" But yeah, I'm trying to be a little better about that. But yeah, especially I like showing the food that I eat out. I had a couple of reels from Copenhagen with some of the dinners I had, and then I do like to kind of show off what I make at home.
I have a few friends that post about their food. One of them, she has the most exquisite dishes, and presentations are out of this world. Out of this world. I have no idea how the food tastes, but every single time she posts something, it is picture perfect. Picture perfect. And yours is that comfort. I feel that comfort level in it. Right. And then I've got another post, and when I see the food, I'm like, does she eat at home? Because there's something every day. And it's like 3 times a day. And I'm thinking, does she eat at home? And of course, then it was like, oh, I've got COVID again. I'm like, yeah, you're never home. Why don't you start cooking? That's just my opinion. So, wow, this has been so much fun. With the dogs barking, they're playing with their toys. It's about to get loud. About to get loud. So, do you have quiet? I'm talking. Do you have any tips for the folks at home or in their cars or wherever they are? Any last words for the audience?
Any last words? I mean, I think one thing is that it's important to be happy. And I feel lucky because I do like what I do. Don't get me wrong. There's some days when you're like, oh. But for the most part, I like my job and I have a fun time doing it. And I feel really lucky that I have a job that I like. And hopefully everyone out there has a job that they like. But think about what makes you happy, because I think that that's super important. And that goes for your work, but it also goes for your free time. And I think sometimes things that get lost, and it can happen when you're married, it can happen when you have kids, it can happen when you're a caregiver to a parent or, spouse or a child, that it gets hard. But I think that try to figure out what makes you happy and then try to do some of that. And I get it. And you're like, oh, what makes me happy is flying to Paris. Well, that's good. But, one thing that I found
happiness.
Realistic happiness. And even, I remember when I was going through my divorce, it was a pretty tough time for me. I was really, really unhappy and I was depressed. But I would go out and I would try to look for things to get a smile. So I took, and I would take pictures. I'd take pictures of flowers, little unexpected things, kindnesses. I think one thing that is missing, let me put it another way. I think there are a lot of things that we can do that don't cost us a lot, that can add joy to the world. And they're little things like, it's funny, I was walking home the other day and there was a woman with a dog and she had these really cute shoes. And I said, oh, your shoes are just cute. And I just wanted to tell you that. And it's funny because she turned around and she ended up with my neighbor Morgan. And I'm like, oh, Morgan. But, if you see somebody and they look nice that day, or you would like their dress, or just, I think we can be kind and we can be civil. And it doesn't take a lot of effort, and things like that. When we do that, it spreads. And I think that is just important to kind of remember that, and just try to be civil and try to be kind at every interaction. No matter whether you're I go to the CVS around the corner from my house all the time, and I know a lot of people that work there, not socially, just I see them and I'm always like, oh, hey, how are you today? So I guess that's just the biggest thing, because we're all here together and it doesn't take a lot usually.
It's funny, if you make every moment better, you'll find happiness in that moment where you're thinking, oh, I don't know what makes me happy. And I'm so busy. I don't have time to find my happiness. All you need to do is be kinder, be thinking of the next person, and you will begin to find happiness, and it will fall into your hands because it's
Yeah.
there. You're not seeing it.
And I always try to build the world that I want to live in,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to build the world that I want to exist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a world where people are kind, and that's a world where people are friendly. And so I just figure if I try to do that in my everyday, and nobody's perfect, we all have our days, but if I try to do that more or less in my everyday, it starts coming back to you, and I think it can spread.
Yes, it can.
So I guess that's the one thing I would say, and just, try to be thoughtful and kind, and don't give up, and we're all gonna make it. So
Thanks, Jean. You made me feel better.
you made me feel better. Thank you so much for asking me to be on your podcast. I am so honored, and this was such a lovely chat.
Thank you. And have a lovely rest of your evening. What are you eating for dinner?
I have no idea. No
Well, I'll
idea.
look for it on social. Maybe you'll share it later.
Yeah, I had to run some errands this morning, so I actually had Chinese for lunch out, which was a treat. So I may dinner may be cheese and crackers tonight. So
I
I'm
hear
not
you.
even hungry
I hear you.
now.
Sometimes that
Girl
happens.
dinner, something like that.
We'll have a nice cup of tea.
Yes, I just finished a nice cup of tea, so we're all good.
Okay. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you. Take care, Joy.
Bye.
Bye.